what she was really saying was, nobody believes refugees are worth that kind of investment. That doesn't mean that's wrong, but it just made me have this moment where I was like, this is going to happen. Like, it has to happen.
Like millions of people around the world, we need to work. Some do it for the money, others do it for the recognition. And if you're lucky, you do it because you love it. But finding purpose and passion in your work can be easier said than done, and the path to success can be unpredictable at best. But if you're looking for some inspiration, then I've got one question for you. Are you consuming your career, or is it consuming you? Welcome to Consuming Careers. Maybe you've heard it said that God doesn't call the equipped, He equips those He calls. Hi, I'm Bruce Smith, and in this week's episode of Consuming Careers, we're sitting down with Kitti Murray, who, with her husband Bill, saw a need in the Atlanta refugee community for jobs, skills training, and a place where refugees could feel welcome. Answering the call, the Murrays jumped in with both feet and created Refuge Coffee, now with 4 locations, continuing what they call the work of welcome. A bit of a caveat here. This is less of a how-to manual, but more of an inspirational story of perseverance and triumph through the valleys of personal loss. So grab a coffee and let's join my conversation with Kitti. Okay, well, welcome back to Consuming Careers, and I'm really, really excited about this interview today with Kitti Murray of Refuge Coffee. Kitti, how are you?
I am good. I'm drinking a cortado, which is my favorite.
It is
coffee
my
drink.
favorite too.
Yeah.
I went to a Cuban restaurant several years ago with my daughter, and we both got this. I think it was a cortado or.
There's a cortadito, which is sweeter.
Yes,
yeah.
maybe we had that, but
yeah.
whatever it was, it's like we were hooked.
Yeah.
And so anywhere I can go to find a cortado,
Yes.
I want to do that. And that's the only thing I've ordered here since I've been here.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm like that. I get stuck on one thing and everybody knows my order.
Yeah.
And now I get it with oat milk, and then you'd have to almost see me do it, but like this much chocolate.
Yeah.
Like just enough that you don't know it's there, but you would know if it wasn't there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, where are we?
Yeah.
Where are we today?
Yes, we are at Refuge Norcross, which is delightful. It's been a long dream that took a while to finally happen, and we're sitting here tonight. Is the manager here, and she's waving.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful space. I love it.
Was this a gas station, or what was this space?
Yes, and our original location was a gas station.
That's
too.
right. Yeah, in Clarkston.
So yeah. So it's just, I love it. 2 of our 4 children live walking distance to here with their 3 children each, and that just makes it feel extra special to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got any of them to work here yet? I mean, it can't be any more convenient than that.
I know, not yet. But they all of them contribute in amazing ways, and they bring the best of themselves to bear on this whole project. Yeah.
Well, I love this space. I mean, it's just like a glass bowl, right? I mean, glass on all 3 sides.
Yes.
You'd have it on 4 if you could.
Yes.
Just a wonderful place to hang out, and great coffee. And I've been here, several times just working.
Yeah.
And it's so just relaxing here.
And the little outdoor courtyard, there will be most of the months of the year that's going to be a great space for people, even today.
Yeah, they've done a great job on this.
Yes.
And when you get tired of coffee, you can get ice cream right next to it.
Right.
That's great. Well, bring us up to speed on kind of what are you doing now? Like, what is your role with Refuge Coffee, and what does that look like?
This is really fun for me because my role is mostly the things I'm good at and that I enjoy, whereas, as you probably know, when you start something, you do anything and everything.
Yeah,
I did fix a toilet this week.
Okay.
Because that just had to be done in Clarkston.
Talk about rolling up your sleeves,
yes,
right?
Sometimes you do have to do that. But really, my role with Refuge, and I will talk about this later, I'm sure, but I'm coming back from not being super present this year for all kinds of personal reasons, which our team handled me not being there so well. But so I see myself as a leader of our team in terms of culture and just health and those sorts of things. We have a COO who is amazing, so trustworthy and so gifted and such a Swiss Army knife. She's amazing, and a bunch of other people too. But then I'm also, we're a nonprofit, and so we raise money, and raising money for about half of our budget has turned into something so marvelous. Like I get to have relationships with people, and I get to draw them into this story. So when we first started, I remember we would talk about, we want to tell the rest of the world a more accurate, more beautiful refugee story. And then that just felt like, oh, can we really do that? Do we really have the ability to do it? And now it feels like we have to do it. I mean, in our world.
Yeah.
But also that's a part of like bringing in support for the mission that we have. And so it's a big part of what I do is I'm the storyteller and
that's huge.
Yeah. And you know how it is. The thing that you enjoy most and that feels easiest to you doesn't feel that big because you love it so much. That's how I feel about it, because I look at the people who do the schedules and the budgets and I have my hands in those things, but those are not for me. And I look at what they do, and it looks like this mountain next to what I do.
Yeah.
And it is huge, but it would probably crush me if I had to do those things now. Scheduling
plate,
and all that stuff. Yeah.
Your plate is as full as you want it to be.
Yeah. Right now it is. It is. Yeah.
Well, how many locations do you have now?
We have 4.
Okay.
So we have our home base in Clarkston. We have a shop in Woodruff Arts Center. Then we're here, which is, a very different community, but there's some similarities in that this is such a diverse community.
Absolutely.
So, so we're here, haven't been here very long. And then we're in a co-work space in Peachtree Corners. So it's not a retail shop. You can't just walk in and order coffee. But
so here and you may know this, but I'll share it. In the city of Norcross, I read a report, this was probably 10 years old, maybe 15 years old, that there were over 140 languages and dialects spoken within 5 miles of downtown Norcross.
Yeah.
So talk about diversity.
Yeah. Yes.
It's right here.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So,
okay.
Just a little bit about your background, where you grew up, first job, kind of what did all that look like? Because I'm trying to figure out how you got here.
Yeah. But I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. Both grandparents were pastors.
Okay.
Grandfathers were pastors.
Yeah.
One wonderful and delightful, and I knew him really well, and the other not so much. But I grew up in just a really sweet home with parents who loved well.
Yeah.
And then I came here to go to Agnes Scott.
Okay.
I was fiercely independent. I told my parents I was not going to marry until I was 35 because marrying young was stupid, and I was complete and whole, and I didn't need a man. And then I met my husband my junior year of college, and he just totally ruined those plans, and I'm so glad he did. So that I just grew up vaguely having a sense that God had a purpose for me.
Okay.
And that purpose was to love people and to right wrongs and to, that, but it was never fully formed. Mm-hmm. And then I met my husband, and he was the same. We were very idealistic. We went off to seminary immediately. And at the beginning of that, while we were engaged, my husband was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Really?
Yeah. And so this college athlete, strong young man just went from, full of strength to really depleted with radiation therapy during our engagement. So we both said later, we started our marriage with this real clear sense that every day's a gift and that there's no guarantee of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So live and love each other today really well.
That's good.
Which made us develop really good habits of communication. Not perfect, but I think we sort of learned the urgency of that early on.
Yeah.
So we were married 44 years, 44 years. But anyway, we got married. We were told we wouldn't be able to have children, and that was a lie. So we ended up having 4. Bill was a pastor for 30 years. I was all the things I thought I didn't want to be. I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time because 4 children, you really have to have a pretty vibrant career to be able to afford childcare for 4 kids.
Absolutely.
So I did all these little side hustles, just to make ends meet. And then as our kids got older, I did the thing I studied in college, and I started to write.
Okay.
And I ended up with a decent writing career for a long time.
Yeah.
And up until actually a couple of years into starting Refuge, because you know how that goes. You start something and you can't pay yourself for a long time.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, so start me off there.
Yeah.
What was that trigger, or what was that light or awakening like this
The
is
tipping
something-
point?
that you latched onto. Tell me.
Well, you can just edit some of this out if you want, but because it might be too much. But at the very beginning of this, Bill and I were new empty nesters.
Mm-hmm. What year is this?
Oh, gosh. I knew you would ask me years.
Mid 2000, 2005?
Yeah, probably around 2005.
Okay.
Our youngest was in college, and we sold our house, and we moved into an apartment in the old Fourth Ward area, and we worked for a ministry that's called Apartment Life. And the whole thing is you just move into a community, apartment community, and the business proposition is resident retention. You move in, and you're sort of you plan the parties, and the events, and you just get people to love living there because of community.
Bring them together.
Yes. And I remember watching Bill, like somebody would be moving in across the parking lot from us, and he would hop out and go help them. And, that community became our parish almost. And we planned a lot of events, and I'll just throw this in there. As people who had served in churches most of our lives, we were sort of in this church bubble, and bubbles, they mar your vision sometimes. And so there were several things that happened there that I think prepared us for moving to Clarkston. One was most of our friends and the people we got to know were not Christians, were not on the same page with us about whatever. And we fell in love. We were like, wait a minute, this idea that they're the people out there that have it wrong, is really,
go fix them, you gotta go get them.
It just all of a sudden rang really false with us, and it created this part. I think another thing that happened was because we weren't doing all this activity inside the church, we had time to get to know our neighbors and to spend time with them, and it was just beautiful. I loved it. And so while we were there, we made a 2-year commitment, and at the end of the sort of halfway through the 3rd year, because we were not ready to leave, we loved it. Bill was studying to teach a seminary course on biblical social justice. And that sounds like it's not a big deal, but back then it was a little of a different turn for us. And so he and I were having dinner one night, and he looked at me and he goes, Kitti, there's something in the Bible that disturbs me. Well, my husband was never easily disturbed. I mean, he was like the calmest human I know. So I knew that was a big deal. He had a PhD in theology, so I knew for the Bible to disturb him was probably a big deal too. So he said, we both know that the Bible talks about widows, aliens, and orphans. Like that's a grouping of people that it mentions over and over and over again. And he goes, so why don't we have any friends that fit that description? And
wow,
I know. And I was super defensive. I was like, sure we do. We've gone on this trip, and we give money here, and we do these projects, And he goes, friendships. I'm talking about friendships. And I was just thankfully I got over myself because I realized he was right. And so that night we decided we're going to move somewhere because we knew we were going to move. That was in the plans for the next 6 months to a year. And he said, we both said, let's move somewhere that'll put us in proximity so we can do life with people and not just people like us.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we didn't think of Clarkston. We were volunteering with World Relief and going there periodically.
Right.
And it was hard to get there and hard to take time and all the things. But 6 months later, that's another story, which is pretty amazing. But 6 months later, we moved to Clarkston. So.
And why Clarkston?
Well, I'll tell you the story because we're not smart enough to have figured it out at all. We had good friends at the time. They lived in Doraville then, and they're I think they're maybe 15 years younger than me, but I met with her for lunch just to catch up. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. And I knew they were thinking of buying a house in Clarkston, but they were going to donate it to their church to use for some mission stuff they were doing there.
Okay.
And so I said, hey, did you buy that house? Just catching up. And she goes, no, that all fell through, but we bought a neighborhood instead. And yeah, while I was taking that in, she just jokingly goes, you want to buy one of our houses? It was a neighborhood of 16 lots. The builder had gone under, and there were 3
oh my goodness,
mostly finished houses.
Yeah.
And she was teasing, and I said, yes, we want one. Like, I called Bill on the way home, and 6 months later, that's where we were. So I think our desire to have a certain kind of, to move to a certain kind of place, it was raw and new, and we didn't, we weren't super strategic. We didn't do research because this came up, and it was so obviously the right thing.
Did you know kind of anything about Clarkston?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did.
Time.
But you don't know what you think you know, and living, it's like our apartments were in downtown, and then we started walking places, and we're like, oh, downtown Atlanta is different when you walk than when you drive and park, know?
Yeah, sure.
And Clarkston was what we thought we knew what it was, but...
Okay, so for those that are listening who have no idea what Clarkston is,
yeah,
can you share a little bit about the demographics there?
Yes.
It's what is it? It's East Atlanta.
Yes.
East of downtown Atlanta, right on the perimeter, near the perimeter.
Yes, it's half a mile outside the perimeter. So if you take the East Ponce de Leon exit from this way, or Church Street from the other way, it's a lot closer than people think. I think they hear about what it is, and they think it's hard to get to.
So what is it?
So it's 1.4 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
Last I checked, I think 18,000 people.
Okay.
I might be wrong about that. Over half of the residents are foreign-born. Most of them are resettled refugees or immigrants to this country. I think it's 65 people groups, 45 languages spoken. Yeah. It's the most densely populated city in all of Georgia. People call it the Ellis Island of the South because people kind of land there from resettlement agencies, accept people, and it just has ended up being kind of a place.
Yeah.
I don't like the Ellis Island term. Mm-hmm. I know this has bad connotations too, but I think about the Silk Road. Like, it's because the people who come there come to contribute. They come traumatized. Just in case people don't know this, the definition of a refugee is someone who's crossed an international border because they're fleeing armed conflict or persecution.
Okay.
And like real physical persecution.
Right.
So people always say, well, what countries are there? And it's usually a year or two after, as people are seeking to leave. And most people leave their country and go to a nearby country. They don't because the country they're in the UN isn't really settled there. There's no way for people to apply for resettlement. So generally, people leave and then do that. So our neighbors are people from all over the world. But what that also means is they're heroic, surviving people, all of them.
Yeah.
They come ready to be a part of this new community. They can't go back.
Yeah.
And they're also come from beautiful cultures. A lot of them coffee cultures, like Ethiopia or Eritrea, or So it's just a beautiful place to be. And I think the same thing happened to us there that happened in the apartments downtown. We just fell in love. We're like, and I'm a natural networker. So if I meet somebody that I think is fascinating or I'm impressed with or whatever, I want other fascinating people in my life to know them.
Yeah.
And I think that was
great.
The first impetus for, hey, but what if we had a coffee shop, you know? That was sort of the first impulse. It wasn't the only one, but that was the first one.
Okay, so I was thinking about this before we got together, and you thought about a coffee shop, but where I went with that is you thought about if you wanted to address the need or bring people together, you could have done it in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. You could have raised money and given away stuff. Could have done that. You could have done events that brought people out to do things together.
Yeah.
But what you landed on was creating jobs in a format that was very community centric, that brings people together around coffee.
Right.
Which is awesome.
Right.
So I don't know, was that the plan, or because you're giving people you're giving people a launch pad, not just a handout or a single experience.
Yes, right.
So talk to me about that.
You know, there were some basic underlying values that Bill and I shared and others around us shared, and you've hit on some of those. I would say there were three sort of inner conversations in my head, and one was I want to bring people together.
Okay.
I want to create a space for that. That's the Starbucks idea, the third environment, which is great. But then as we got to know our neighbors, what I realized was that we needed jobs, that people needed jobs. And then I started to think, but wait a minute, throwing someone who's been through trauma, who's still learning the basics, like how do I get a phone here, or how do I drive here, or how do I talk to my neighbor here, giving them a job without training to prepare them to either stay in that job or get a new job or whatever is next. That was really important. And it all just kind of came together. So this idea of we need a coffee shop here. And that was selfish. I love coffee. I love coffee shops. I'm a writer. I need to get out of my house. That's what I need. It needs to be here. That was just the first thing. And then the other thing was bringing people together, like connecting. I found myself going, wait, I would talk to people and I'd say, you think you know what a refugee is? Like, do you know a refugee? Do you know, there? But for the grace of God, it could be totally switched. It isn't. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. So that idea of bringing people together in a way that what we began to call it is that was agendaless. Like, we're not here to tell you we have an agenda for you. Yeah. Most refugees fled political, religious, or racial agendas, and why would we say, oh, trust us, we've got an agenda that's better. Why would that work for people? And then also the idea, as we started working on it, we're like, wait, we need to pay people, and we need to pay them well. We need to give them a chance to breathe, so they can plan. So a lot of these sort of basic values, and we have not done it right all the time. Like, we've done it wrong a lot, and that's how we figure out that we need to do it better.
Yeah, sure.
But, so all of that kind of worked together. Yeah. And it feels like we stumbled into something, and I would have said yes to this if I had heard somebody say it early on, but we started to go, wait a minute, people would say, oh, they would treat me like Mother Teresa and like, oh, you're doing such a wonderful thing for these refugees. And I'd be like, no, their talent for welcoming people and for parts of this that I don't get, that we're doing it with
That's right.
people, not for them.
Oh, yeah. People are capable and talented. Come on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the technical term would be asset-based development, community development. you can talk about it and you can read about it, but once you do it, you realize, oh, it's doable,
Right.
but it's very
Right.
hard. And it's really easy. People step back into that, kind of handout mentality.
Yeah. So I'll just be honest, and I would say often I would equate refugee with immigrant. Like,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
another word for it.
Yeah.
But rarely do I kind of wrap around all the connotation of refugee, like why they would be a refugee and what has happened
Yeah.
before this. So
Yeah.
I think that's a huge distinction. Look, I may be the only one that thinks this way, but look, I'm here in America. I've never
Yeah.
been a refugee of
Right.
anything, right?
Yeah.
So-
I would say, I think there are elements of that are true. I think what the ultimate experience that many immigrants have is the same as a refugee. And
Yeah.
often and here's what's hard. I think politically there's a lot of very binary stories about this that make it sound like, oh, well, this is okay, but this isn't.
Yep.
Or nobody should be welcome because we need to take care of ourselves, all that stuff. But I actually had a more binary understanding of it until we had an intern who was a dreamer, a DACA.
Okay.
She's now almost finishing law school. She's amazing. But my husband asked her a ton of questions, and he was like, okay, I think I need to rethink this,
Yeah.
So, and I would say the other thing is, if you want to compare refugee resettlement, which is a tough road, with maybe asylum seeking at the border.
Okay.
At least in refugee resettlement, there's a line to stand in. It's a long line. It's a frustratingly slow line.
Yep.
But at the border, there's not even a line. Like,
Wow.
it's just like, and the needs are often the same. So
Yeah.
I've decided that it's probably way more nuanced than I understand. And
But you stepped into it.
we did.
You
and
did.
it's
All-
messy,
all in,
all of it.
right.
Yes.
You
and
jumped right in the pool.
We did.
You didn't even ask how deep it was or if it was cold.
Yeah, that probably means I'm not smart. Like, speaking of tipping points, here's a story.
Yeah.
I have a friend named Amina who's now in her 90s.
Wow.
She's from Somalia. She witnessed her husband and all 10 children. They were murdered in Somalia, and she's really an amazing woman she's like a one-person NGO just in the way she cares about people. Well, one day I said, Amina, you need a break. You don't ever take breaks, and you're not going to stay healthy if you don't take some breaks. So let's go I knew she loved cappuccinos. Let's go get a cappuccino. We went to Decatur to Dancing Goats, and we're sitting there on these leather sofas and drinking our cappuccinos, and she looks around and she goes, Kitti, there'll never be anything like this in Clarkston. And I always tell people, Amina speaks 9 languages and not one of them is victim. So I was like, wait,
Wow,
that doesn't
yeah.
sound like you. I don't think you're complaining or whining. What are you saying? And we talked a little more. And what she was really saying was, nobody believes refugees are worth that kind of investment, which I think is true.
Yeah,
This was
yeah.
Dancing Goats is on a street in Decatur, and where, it isn't a big risk to park there. And that doesn't mean that's wrong, but it just made me have this moment where I was like, this is going to happen. Like, it has to happen because Amina's worth it.
Yeah.
My community's worth it. There's just so much worth here, that needs to be imparted or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that sounds like not only a call, but a push.
Yes.
Right? That pulled you right in. So
Yes.
then the plan started to pull the coffee together.
I kept thinking, I'll talk to people, and somebody, like my husband and I used to say, some young, wild-eyed missionary ukulele playing person with a lot of energy will do this.
Right.
And I remember I invited like 4 or 5 couples to our house, and they were people that had means, and Bill and I, he grew up pastoring small churches. We we did not have the means to seed this financially.
Right.
And I was telling our sons that we were going to do that. And I said, I'm inviting these people over and I'm going to, cast a vision and ask them if they'll seed the beginning of it.
Right.
And one of our sons said, Mom, do you have a business plan? Do you have, I don't think you're ready to ask for money. And boy, was he right.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I'd already invited the couples over for dinner, and Bill and I talked to them about the community, and then I asked them if they would just give me wisdom. And they became our first board.
Okay.
Eventually, and they challenged a lot of what I had to say. They're the ones who said, you don't need to build a coffee shop. That's way too expensive. Start with a truck.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, we want to build community, which the truck really helped us do, because it created this space anybody could walk up to. There were no doors or windows,
and I
which was
surprised
actually good.
when I went there the first time, because I thought, where's the building? Right?
Yeah. Did you go when we were in the parking lot at the beginning? Oh yeah. So, it was the greatest way to start.
Yeah. That's great. So what is I saw a video, and you talk about doing the work of welcome. Mm-hmm. Tell me, what does that mean?
I'm so bad at answering questions with bullet points, but I have a story. So I have a good friend who at that time he still has a nonprofit in Iraq. And he and I were talking, and he told me the story that you've probably heard from the Harvard Business Review about the buggy whip company.
Yep.
Have you heard this?
Sure.
And they went out of business, and the suggestion was they went out of business because they defined themselves in such a narrow way, and if they had said, no, we're a people transportation business instead of just buggy whips, they could have pivoted, which I'm sure that wasn't a word anybody used back then.
Right.
So he asked me, he said, what is Refuge? If somebody said, what is the business of Refuge? And I said, I asked him about his organization, and he told me something. And I was like, yeah, that's us. And then I went, well, no, I think if I had to put it in one word, it's the word welcome. Mm-hmm. And that gave us a template, really. And it's simple, so it's easy to communicate, but it's actually not as simple to do. During the pandemic, we had this sign. It's finally in the trash. We need somebody to remake one for us. But it had 17 languages, and it said welcome in Clarkston.
Yeah.
And but next to it during the pandemic, because we were just a drive-through for a while, we said, please get your coffee and leave. This sort of dissonance,
Yeah.
So welcome, but not really.
Yeah. Is coffee kind of a placeholder for welcome? I mean, could it be anything? It could be.
It could be anything.
It could be food. It could be any other kind of experience that brought people together.
Yes.
And made them feel welcome.
Yes.
And built community.
But coffee is ubiquitous in the whole world. And so is tea, and we do tea okay, but that's, we've decided that coffee is our focus.
Yeah. So through this experience, kind of what maybe surprised you that you learned about the refugee community, about how best to communicate, how to bring people together better? I mean, you've learned some lessons along the way, and you're still improving the model.
Yeah.
What was something that really surprised you, didn't see that coming?
How much you have to think about money. That, I didn't really want to do that.
Yeah.
But if we're all, our mission is our payroll, and we just have to, but also how much wisdom everybody on the team brings to those improvements. So I've learned, I know listening's important, but I have learned how important it is. And then also how, so compromise of our mission is just not acceptable. Figuring out how to make sure. So every once in a while we'll have something so we do business hours. Office hours for our support team on Mondays. And it's required, but it's not, it's but if you have a meeting it's no big deal. But I remember one staff person who, I love it. She is an introvert and kind of shy. And so she asked, what if we didn't do it all the time? Because it's so distracting. It's so, and I was like, yeah. And I felt that for her. And then the next week I went, wait a minute. No, there's a reason we're doing this. And I know it's challenging, but I finally went, wait a minute. I think this is one of those times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, give me a success story with maybe one of the refugees that have come in and just flourished.
There are so many. A big heartbreak of the refugee crisis is that people have interrupted educations. They're in a camp where they don't get educated, or in there. I'm actually thinking of James, who's moving to Wisconsin.
Okay.
But who still works for us up until he leaves. He's from Sudan. He is just a delightful young man. And he grew up in Kakuma, which is in Kenya. It's the largest refugee camp in the world. It's near Nairobi, yeah. And his mother and his brothers were all there. And because he reached a certain age, he was able to come. The UN contacted him and said, there's a path for you now. And the whole idea was, and then your family can come later. Well, later the pandemic hit, and later felt like never. Yeah. So the average wait in a refugee camp is 7 to 15 years. So it's long, I know. Yeah. And when he decided to go, it was like, okay, but you're coming soon. And he just loves his family. This is kind of a cool story to me, but because we're just a coffee shop. Like, we're not an advocacy group. We're not an aid agency. We don't resettle people. We just do the simplest things. And yet we get to meet some pretty amazing people. So John Ossoff, we catered for his wedding.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
And he was running for office, right?
Yeah, back then.
Yep.
But then years later, when he's in office, and he's a big advocate for refugee resettlement. Well, James sent me a picture that he had just gotten from his brothers, and 2 of them had been ambushed in a van on the way back into Kakuma. And he sends me, and one, I think it was a bullet ricochet, but he had blood. He was okay, but the panic and terror on their faces were terrible. And I thought, oh, how would I feel if this were members of my family?
Yeah,
and I get this picture and I can't do anything. So I called John Ossoff's office, or I think I emailed them. And within 15 minutes, I heard back from them. Okay. And, they got behind trying to get his family here.
Wow.
And it took 6 months, but 6 months is nothing,
Sure, yeah.
And James, at that point, he's in college now. He's just doing really well. He's amazing. And so we all got to go to the airport and meet his family. And then he got to introduce them to John Ossoff on World Refugee Day at our shop.
Oh, awesome.
So to me, that feels like, I don't think we or I have that much influence. But when we do have it and we can pull a card like that, it's pretty amazing to me. And I want to say that's due to, I feel like we tell the better refugee story when we just serve people coffee,
That is awesome.
So, yeah.
Look, note to self, it doesn't take, look, it's more complicated than what you're describing, but at those little steps, right? Just serve some coffee and bring people together.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
And do it really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in building Refuge Coffee, would you say that there were any trade-offs that you had to make in your life for this to...
Personally, do you think? Or just...
Sure.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's my child, because it isn't, but it is a little how that feels. Like, delivering a baby is not fun. It's hard.
Yeah.
But would you not do it,
Right.
And so I would say, I remember a friend of mine said, Kitti, I think you should be, do you know God wants you to do this? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, are you sure? And she asked me so earnestly that I felt like I better figure this out.
Better be sure.
Yeah, and what she said was, I think this is going to be harder than you think and bigger than you think. And because we started slowly like we did, block parties with coffee over propane burners in the neighborhood, that it didn't feel big at first. So I went away for the day, and I remember writing in my journal all the ways that God is referred to as a refuge. We had the name.
Wow.
And I eventually quit writing because I was getting cramps in my hands. But this idea that, I'm doing something that is linked so closely to the character of God that I have to do it. But I will say, my husband said to me one day, he goes, we finally figured out who the workaholic in the family is. But I worked so hard. I had a eye twitch for at least a year. I would go to bed and go, how early can I really get up and still have had enough sleep? But I loved it.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that's not sustainable.
Right,
so after a couple of years, that had to change. But so I think the trade-off health-wise for me might have been a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
but not.
Well, look, I've been in the kind of the recruitment space, and I interview people all the time professionally in the work that I do. And I would say almost in every situation, most people can identify a trade-off.
Yes.
Whether that was I had to give up time with my family, or I had to take a pay cut, or I had to, all these kind of fairly tangible, maybe professional kind of things. But what I hear you saying is, it didn't sound like a big, trade-off in your life to do the thing that you felt like God was calling you to do.
Well, but and I will say though, I'm thankful that I have a family that will push back if they feel like they're not getting what they need from me in a really good way, not in a ugly sort of passive way. My mom was entering into dementia during that time, so I had to take a lot of time for her care, and my husband wasn't ill then, but the last few years he was, and so I did not make those trade-offs.
Yeah.
The trade-off I did make, which I'm thankful my husband was willing, I just didn't draw a paycheck for a few years.
Yeah, sure.
And then drew a small one. And I hated saying that at first because I didn't want people to, it's not bragging, it's just saying if you want to do something like this, there are trade-offs and you just measure them.
Not unlike startups.
Right.
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 You kind of eat, ramen noodles for 2 years until, you can sell your product.
And Bill bought into it. He was as much a part of it. He would say he wasn't, but he was a big part of it.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
I want to hear, or at least share, if you don't mind, kind of what happened with Bill.
Yeah.
Because you've had a tumultuous last year or so.
Yeah.
And I want the audience to understand that.
Yeah.
But also, doing what you're doing doesn't do it by itself, right?
No.
It takes something to push you through. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about this experience with last year or so?
I don't mind at all. And I think I'm in a space at the moment where I'm not going to cry. Like I said, my husband and I were married 44 years. Wow. He was my best friend. I was in love with him, and he was in love with me. At the beginning of this year, or probably around the pandemic, my husband's health started to fail. Now, he is the toughest person I know. And he, up until December of last year, he was going to CrossFit, and I finally realized it is his job to fight. It's my job to grieve and to anticipate some, because I knew. Anyway, he was busy investing in people at all times. Like that December, there was a guy we had met with 10 kids, and he came home one day and I don't know how I found out, but he had gone to Walmart and bought 10 blankets and taken them over to them, just quietly doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he was just very beloved in our community and at our family at Refuge and everybody. One of our sons said, yeah, Dad, radiation saved his life back when he was 22.
Right.
But it took his life when he was
Oh, wow.
67. You know, those last years, it was all radiation damage. So all of his systems were shutting down. He had helped start a nonprofit clinic that's in Clarkston and was on their board for a long time. So when he went into the hospital with pneumonia and his heart, his lungs, his kidneys all shutting down in March of this year, every day one of those doctors was his attending physician.
Yeah.
So we felt very carried. So he passed away on March 29th.
Okay.
And it's the worst thing I've ever gone through in my life. Like, it's just horrible.
Yeah.
And I've gotten past what I used to feel sometimes, which was, oh, but refugees have it so much worse. You know, like measuring pain. Like mine never did measure up because...
So how do you frame that up now?
Pain is pain, and sorrow is sorrow, and not one of my refugee friends or employees or anybody has ever said, "Oh, you think you have it bad." No, when you're in it, you have it bad, and so one of our employees who was our first trainee still works for us, Leon Shambana from Congo. He was in Congo when Bill died. He called me that week when he was in the hospital. And this really explains Leon and the culture he's from. About 2 weeks after Bill died, he came home. And his travel got crazy, and so I just knew he had to be exhausted. And he said, I'm coming to your house. And I said, well, go sleep some first. And he said, no, I must come. And he walks into the house, he takes his hat off, he stands in the middle of the living room, and I was like, can I get you tea? And he just brushed me off like, no, no, no. And then he just started speaking to Bill. And he goes, Bill Murray, I love you. You are, and he used to call him the strong man because he would always, or the destroyer, which sounds terrible, but it meant that he could, like, we would play games and Bill was just an athlete. And he just went into how much he loved Bill. And then prayed, and then had tea, and I was able to tell him things, and we were able to cry together. But I feel like I have this community of people who are acquainted with grief, you know, in a way that has been so great.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So all of that, I took as much time as I needed.
Yeah.
Like, it was those first 2 months I barely remember. You know, and we have sat with people that work with us from other countries and grieved with them, you know.
Sure.
So,
That's
and
great.
then 2 months ago, I found out that I had cancer and got a cancer diagnosis, which now feels like a speed bump, but at the time... Yeah, and so again, I stepped out. I was just starting to have some energy and feel like I had focus. I mean, I was working, but I wasn't very.
Yeah.
I've always been flaky, but this level of flakiness is new for me. But
That's amazing.
But I think we just have this team of people who they believe in what we're doing, and and they need space for their own lives too. And one of the things one of our staff said to another American staff, when we say we care about people, we care about everybody. This isn't just only the refugees. You know, that just isn't what we believe.
Thank you for sharing that. So how has that on this side of it, how has it reframed the way you look at this ministry, the way you interact with the refugee community, with friends, family, the way you think about life? Kind of, how is that? Has that changed? Has it clarified anything for you?
That's a good question that I might not know the answer to yet. You know,
you hit on it 25 years ago, when Bill was first diagnosed.
Yeah.
And you said
40 years
ago.
Yeah.
And you made the comment about how it clarified the urgency of life.
Yes. Yeah, and there's some unhealthiness in that, right? There's sort of this, it's up to me, Messiah. I'd call it a Messiah complex. Like, if I'm not here, it doesn't get done. I think that has been underscored to me.
Yeah.
That it's not as up to me as I thought it was, you know? But also that I do have value, so when I'm not here, there's certain things but they're not big, and they're not going to kill us. Yeah, I used to say back in the spring, I would say, oh, grief is like this. And now I'm like, I don't know what grief is like. I think I know. And
Yeah. So when I look at kind of this experience from the outside of you, I see an amazing story of perseverance. And I want to ask, does it feel like perseverance to you, or does it just come naturally?
Oh, it feels like perseverance. It does. And I do think I am thankful for years of, that whole, a long obedience in the same direction idea. Yeah. I'm thankful that I've kind of learned some things along the way. This is so hard to say because it sounds like I'm like this all the time. But I have learned the personal things about, think about the life of Jesus and how he had a practice of getting away.
Yeah.
So I've learned to have a rhythm of getting away. But he also got interrupted a lot when he got away. So this morning I had that moment of, oh no, okay, yeah, I'll drop everything and come. And then I was like, wait a minute, I don't think this is that time.
Yeah, that's good.
But, when the toilet broke the other day and I was there.
That's an interruption you can't ignore.
Yeah, that's like, I'm just going to do that. But, so Leon often, when he tells the story of Refuge, he said, and he is very much a part of this. So, he accepted a job with us. He had been working at the chicken processing plant, which is a very typical first job for a refugee.
Is it? Okay.
Oh yeah, and it's not the worst job in the world, but you don't get to practice English. It's an hour and a half commute. They're up near Gainesville.
Right.
It just doesn't lead to flourishing.
Yep.
That's okay. But he left that job, and he was like, I didn't know if there would be enough hours for me. I was like, and are these people do I actually have a job? And are other people thinking I'm crazy? And he said, but we persevered. And so we were all a part of that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So what's kind of the biggest, for Refuge Coffee, what's the biggest challenge you're kind of facing right now? What's kind of consuming part of your time and energy as you think about current and what the future of Refuge Coffee looks like?
The real answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like we had a rough season, 2022 at the beginning of the year. I took a sabbatical and came back to we were not in a good place.
Yeah.
And there were some reasons for that, and we began to work on that. But that was a long haul.
Okay.
But what we do wouldn't work without a donor base, And so this year, as you know, has been tough for people who have investments, and it's just been a hard year, and people are afraid. And so they're also very generous. At the end of the day, that's my conclusion, always. But I do think I've been away, so I haven't been doing the fundraising that probably needed a little more hustle and focus.
Sure.
So we're at this place right now where to move ahead, and then in the next year we're working on, all right, how do we get our model to work better and not need these infusions from donors? We'll always need that. That's always a part of who we are. I actually love that part of who we are.
Okay.
It gives everybody a chance to participate. But our challenge and the challenge is just making it through the next quarter with more liquidity is the wrong word, but but more financial stability.
Well, you're doing the work of welcome.
Yes.
In the way that you invite people into the story.
Yeah.
Whether they're just buying a coffee or whether they're
Right.
contributing in a larger way to maybe build another location or make opportunities
Yes.
for people.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, so when you think about your career, this last 40 years, would you say that you've consumed this career or it's been consuming you?
That's a really good question. And career is funny because that, I have a good friend who's a career CEO. I won't tell you where she is now, but she's the real deal. And I always tell her I'm the fake deal, but because I've only done this once. But so I haven't not had that kind of career. This is
That's all right.
everything about Refuge. I brought little knowledge and discovered how much I didn't know. And it's a great way to start, actually. So I think the first few years, it consumed me in the sense that I didn't have any confidence and I feared everything,
Yeah.
And now I'm like, obviously there are things that make me afraid, but I'm not that afraid anymore. And I know who I am, and so I'm okay with not knowing things.
Yeah.
So that part of it doesn't really consume me. I feel like I am getting nourishment from this, as I hope we're giving nourishment to others at the same time. So I had a lot of that in my head.
Yeah.
Because I just knew that it wasn't healthy to let this consume me. But I feel like that is really more the reality of it. And that was true probably a few years ago as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. All right. Here comes the highlight questions. We're moving into the lightning round.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm scared to death, but go for it. Yeah.
and you really don't need to be. This is going to
Okay.
be easy, and I want the first answer that comes.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
What's the best item on the menu here?
Oh, the cortado.
Gosh, that's so good.
Yes.
I really do love that.
It's perfect.
Number 2. What has been the most formative book you've ever read?
Oh. I read all the time. I think I'm reading 5 books right now, not because I'm such a great reader, but I just have a hard time.
Yeah.
Other than the Bible. I'm not trying to show off, but I think Anna Karenina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Tolstoy is probably one of my favorite because of the narratives, and there are 2 narratives that are anyway. Yeah, lightning round, so I won't go into it. But
anybody reading Tolstoy is kind of showing off. I'm just going to tell you.
No. I was an English major,
then
but
that's just bread and butter for you.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a beautiful story.
Number 3.
Yes.
If you could put a Refuge coffee anywhere in the world, where would you put it?
Ooh. I think it would be so cool to have one in Kakuma and the refugee camp near Nairobi, but I can't picture how it would work. Yeah. Also, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Last question.
Okay.
Ready? Can you ever have too many grandchildren?
No. No.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's a great question.
All right. So how can people contact you or connect with you, or how do they participate?
So if you go to our website,
Which is
you can refuge.coffee or refugecoffeeco.com. They're both the same.
Refuge Coffee Co.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what we are on social media as well.
Great.
If you want to contact me personally, you can do Kitti, Kitti, at refugecoffeeco.com. I'm a little slower these days, but yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, Kitti, thank you so much for taking this time. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to carve out this time with you, or you be able to have the time to spend with me, but I know there's going to be so many people that are going to value this interview.
I value it. It's been
a
great,
sweet time
Bruce.
together.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Consuming Careers. If you've enjoyed the show, please click the follow button in your podcast app so you won't miss any of our future episodes. And if you have a minute, write us a review. We truly appreciate hearing from our listeners. And as always, I'm Bruce Smith, and you've been listening to Consuming Careers.